There are people who have spent 30, 40, or even 50 years feeling strange, feeling like too much for some and not enough for others. People who have spent their whole lives thinking something was broken inside them, when in reality what was happening was that no one had given them the right words to understand themselves. And what I am going to tell you today has exactly to do with that, because there are habits, things we do almost without realizing it, patterns that have been there forever, which modern psychology identifies as clear signs of the autism spectrum. They aren't dramatic, they aren't obvious, they are subtle, they are everyday, and they often go completely unnoticed, even by professionals. Today we are going to look at 10 of those habits. Some will surprise you, others will make you pause the video and stop to think. And there is one in particular, number 7, that when you hear it will leave you completely speechless, because it summarizes in a brutal way what it means to live without a diagnosis for decades. Stay tuned, because this isn't a video about a medical condition. It's a video about what it feels like to be someone the world never fully understood. Before we get into the habits, I need us to be clear on something fundamental, because there is a lot of confusion about this. Autism, or more precisely autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is not a disease. It is not something to be cured. It is not a tragedy. It is a different way of processing the world. The autistic brain is not broken. It is calibrated differently. It perceives differently, processes differently, and responds differently. And the reason why so many people reach adulthood without knowing it is precisely because the signs don't shout, they whisper. They are those patterns that were always there, but that no one knew how to read, that were interpreted as shyness, as weirdness, as a lack of willpower, or as a difficult character, when in reality they had a completely coherent neurological explanation. According to recent data, it is estimated that more than 80% of autistic adults took years, even decades, to receive a correct diagnosis. Many never receive one, and that has a huge cost in terms of mental health, self-esteem, relationships, and quality of life. So let's get straight to the point. Here are the 10 most common habits that, according to psychology, can be clear signs of the autism spectrum. And remember, identifying with one or several of these points doesn't automatically mean anything, and it means it's worth continuing to explore. Habit 1. Routines are sacred. We start with something that you have probably normalized your whole life, whether in yourself or in someone close to you. The need for things to go a certain way, always without variation. We are not talking about being organized or methodical by choice. We are talking about something much deeper, an almost physical need for the environment to be predictable, for breakfast to be the same, for the route to work not to change, for plans not to be altered at the last minute. That if something deviates from the established script, even if it is something small and seemingly insignificant, the level of discomfort is disproportionate to those around them. Psychology has a name for this: insistence on sameness, sameness. And it is one of the diagnostic criteria for ASD that is least understood from the outside, because of course from the outside it looks like inflexibility, it looks like stubbornness, it looks like that person needs to control everything, but that's not it. What happens at a neurological level is that the autistic brain interprets unexpected changes as real threats, not as inconveniences, but as threats. The nervous system activates in the same way as if there were real danger, and that generates a genuine anxiety response that can be difficult to manage and difficult to explain. Think of routines as the scaffolding that allows the autistic nervous system to function with relative stability. Without that scaffolding, the world becomes unpredictable. And an unpredictable world is an exhausting world. You've seen it in someone, you recognize it in yourself. There's more. Habit 2. Sensory hypersensitivity. This is one of the most frequent and at the same time one of the most invisible to those who do not experience it. Do you know someone who cannot stand being in a crowded restaurant because the noise is unbearable to them? Who cannot wear certain fabrics because the friction on their skin causes discomfort? Does it cause them discomfort that goes beyond the aesthetic? Are they bothered by fluorescent lights in a way that doesn't affect others? Can they detect a smell that no one else seems to notice? This is called atypical sensory processing and is one of the most documented characteristics of the autism spectrum. What happens is that the autistic brain does not filter environmental stimuli the same way a neurotypical brain does. In a room full of people, most people automatically select which sounds to process and which to ignore. The brain does that filtering work without conscious effort. For many people on the spectrum, that filter works differently. Everything comes in, everything competes for the same attention. Background noise, conversations, lights, smells, the texture of clothing, all at the same time with the same intensity. What is ambient to you can be deafening noise to them. What is normal for you may be exhausting or even painful for them. And here is something many people are unaware of. Hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity can coexist in the same person. Someone can be hypersensitive to sound and hyposensitive to pain. They may not register cold the same way, but react intensely to a certain texture. It's not all or nothing. It's a different calibration of the nervous system. And that different calibration explains many behaviors that from the outside seem exaggerated or hard to understand. Habit 3. Difficulty with nonverbal social communication. I need to be very precise here because this is probably the most misunderstood of all. We are not talking about shyness. We are not talking about introversion. We are not talking about the person not wanting to socialize. We are talking about something much more specific. The unwritten rules of social interaction are not intuitive for many people on the spectrum. They are invisible to them. What do I mean by unwritten rules? All those things that most people learn automatically, almost by osmosis from a young age. How long is it appropriate to look someone in the eyes without it being awkward? How do you know when a conversation has ended? When are you supposed to laugh at something? How do you interpret if someone is being ironic or completely serious? What exactly does it mean when someone tells you, let's stay in touch? For most people, these things are automatic. For many people on the spectrum, they are not, and the difference is huge in terms of daily effort. They have to learn them consciously and deliberately. Observing, analyzing, memorizing patterns, applying them, like following an instruction manual that nobody gave you, written in a language that isn't entirely your own, and the exhaustion generated by that brutal, constant process of social decoding. There is a name for it, social masking fatigue or masking, which we will talk about in depth in Habit 6 because it is absolutely key to understanding how many autistic adults live who have never received a diagnosis, If these reflections are bringing value to your life, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to keep strengthening your mind with every new video. Let's continue. Habit 4. Very intense and specific interests. I am going to ask you something directly. Do you know someone who knows absolutely everything about a specific topic? And when I say everything, I mean everything. The complete history of civil aviation since 1903. Every statistic from every season of a TV show, every insect species cataloged in a specific region of the world, a complete discography of an artist with all their dates, collaborations, and production trivia. It's not just being a big fan of something, that's something else. This is called a special interest or hyperfocus. And it's one of the most iconic characteristics of the autistic spectrum, though also one of the most misunderstood. what happens isn't just high enthusiasm, it's a deep, almost compulsive absorption that generates genuine pleasure and nervous system activation, acting as a source of emotional regulation. It's not that they just really like that topic, it's that the topic gives them something that few other things can. Clarity, security, mastery, pure pleasure. From the outside, it may seem obsessive or baffling, especially when the person wants to share that interest in social situations where the context doesn't call for it. But what many don't see is the other side of that coin. Those special interests, that capacity to hyperfocus, to absorb information in a deep and sustained way, are in many cases the source of extraordinary skills. Many of history's great innovators, scientists, musicians, and creators displayed this exact type of deeply focused thinking. It's not an anecdote, it's a pattern. Habit 5. Repetitive movements or stimming. Have you ever seen someone sway slightly when they are focused? Clicking a pen rhythmically, twirling hair repeatedly, moving fingers a certain way when anxious or processing something intense, humming quietly without realizing it. This has a name: stimming. A contraction of the English self-stimulatory behavior, and it exists for a very specific and functional reason. Stimming serves a nervous system regulation function. When the outside world is too intense, too unpredictable, or too demanding, repetitive movement acts as an internal anchor, a rhythm the body creates to stabilize itself when everything else feels out of control. Think of it this way. When someone is nervous and bounces their leg nonstop, they are performing a minor form of stimming. It's something we all do to some degree. The difference is that for people on the spectrum, it's not occasional, it's necessary. It is a constant tool for sensory and emotional management. The most relevant thing here is the following. Many people learn from a young age to suppress this behavior because they were told it looks weird, that you shouldn't do it, or that it draws attention. And suppression has a real cost. Accumulated anxiety, exhaustion, and greater difficulty processing the environment. It's not a tic, it's not a quirk, it's not something that needs to be fixed. It is a perfectly valid self-regulation tool that the environment, often out of ignorance, has tried to eliminate. Habit 6. Masking the invisible mask. We have arrived at one of the most important habits in this video, and also the most invisible, because by definition, it is designed exactly for that, so that no one sees it. Masking is the often completely unconscious practice of imitating neurotypical social behaviors to fit in, to look normal, to not stand out in the wrong way. How is this done in practice? You observe how people react in certain situations and copy those reactions. You practice conversations mentally before having them. You learn which facial expression is expected of you in each context. You force yourself to maintain eye contact for the time you've calculated is appropriate, even if it's physically uncomfortable. You adapt your tone of voice, your gestures, your vocabulary. You build a social persona that works, and it works so well that no one suspects a thing. No one knows the cost. People who practice masking intensely for years often do not receive a diagnosis precisely because they function, they comply, they appear to be fine. But inside, the level of exhaustion is devastating. It's like keeping up a performance for 8, 10, 12 hours a day without rest, without being able to let your guard down, without being able to just exist. And here is the part of this whole phenomenon that impacts me the most. Many of these people end up receiving diagnoses of generalized anxiety, chronic depression, or personality disorders. Not because that is what they have, but because the mental health system sees the symptoms of burnout without understanding the real cause. Masking is so effective that it even deceives professionals. This phenomenon is especially documented in autistic women and non-binary people who have historically been the most underdiagnosed. Research shows that autistic women tend to develop more sophisticated social camouflage strategies from a very early age. in part because social expectations regarding their behavior are different, and that leads them to adulthood with a late diagnosis or none at all. Masking is not weakness, it is adaptation, but it is an adaptation that comes at a huge price. Habit 7, literal thinking and difficulty with ambiguity. This is what I promised you at the beginning, and now I understand why it left me speechless. Imagine this scene. You're at work, your boss walks by your desk and says, "Stop by my office when you have a moment." You finish what you're doing, which takes you about 2 minutes, and you go to their office. He looks at you surprised and says, "Oh, it wasn't urgent. Whenever you can. No rush, sometime today." That isn't how you had understood it. You had understood exactly what he said. Now multiply that scene by every conversation you have in a day, every day of the week, every week of the year, for an entire lifetime. The autistic brain tends to process language more literally than the neurotypical brain. And in a world where human communication is full of layers, hidden meanings, sarcasm, irony, idioms that don't mean what they literally say, and hints that you're supposed to decipher without instructions, that is a constant labyrinth. "We should hang out sometime" doesn't mean they want to hang out. "I'm fine" can mean the opposite. Whatever you want rarely means they want whatever you want. Everyday human language is built on a layer of shared ambiguity that most navigate automatically. For many people on the spectrum, that automatic navigation doesn't exist. Everything must be consciously deciphered in real time. And what struck me deeply while researching this habit was reading the testimony of a person who received their diagnosis at 38 and said something that stayed with me, quote, "Now I understand why I always thought people were speaking in code. For 38 years, I believed everyone knew something I didn't. 38 years thinking you were the problem, that you didn't understand because you weren't smart enough or attentive enough or normal enough, when in reality, your brain processed language in a different way, a perfectly valid one that no one had ever explained to you." That is what the absence of a diagnosis can do, not just leave you without tools, but make you believe that you were the problem. Habit 8, difficulty managing time and transitions. This is one of the habits most frequently misinterpreted as laziness, disorganization, or lack of commitment. And it is a huge injustice because it has a completely documented neurological basis. People on the autistic spectrum often have a relationship with time that is fundamentally different from everyone else's. And this manifests in two seemingly contradictory ways that nevertheless share the same root. On one hand, hyperfocus. When something grabs an autistic person's attention, time may simply cease to exist for them. They've been working on something for 3 hours, and it feels like 20 minutes have passed. It's not that they don't have a sense of time, it's that their nervous system processes the experience of time differently when they are completely absorbed in something. On the other hand, transitions. Switching from one activity to another can require an enormous effort. It's not resistance, it's that the autistic brain needs more time and cognitive resources to make that state change, to close one thing and open another. What for most is simply moving on to the next thing. For many people on the spectrum, it involves a readjustment process that takes real time and energy. In the workplace, in academic settings, or in daily life, this is constantly interpreted as tardiness, disorganization, or a lack of professionalism. People who function this way accumulate years of criticism and negative messages about their management skills, their reliability, and their character, when in reality, what is happening is that their executive function, the part of the brain that manages planning, transitions, and time management, functions different. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And the difference between those two things matters a great deal. Habit 9, intense but highly selective social relationships. I am going to debunk one of the most widespread myths about autism because it is one of the most harmful. The myth is this: autistic people don't want to socialize with others. They are loners by nature. They don't care about connections. False, completely false. Many people on the spectrum desire deep and genuine connection with the same intensity or even more than any neurotypical person. What happens is that their way of relating is different, and that difference does not mean less, it means distinct. How does this manifest? They prefer few but deep relationships. Small talk, the how are you, that nobody expects a real answer to. Superficial social exchange that serves as a lubricant in daily interactions is confusing or exhausting for them, not because they don't care about people, but because they don't really understand the purpose of communication that doesn't convey real information. They prefer conversations with substance, real topics, and genuine exchanges.